The chamber did not erupt, it imploded. Conversations dulled into whispers, and whispers thinned into tension. Ambassadors glanced toward their own aides. Data pads glowed with hastily summoned treaties. On the higher tiers, old alliances began to shift like tectonic plates. A serene envoy muttered in crystalline tones. A Valari priest count lit incense, usually reserved for conflict mediation. Caden remained still, hands behind his back. He had not smiled again, but he didn't need to. Lurok remained outwardly composed, but his eyes no longer scanned the hall. They locked onto the Terran below, as if seeing him for the first time. Caden's tone had been mild, his logic irrefutable. A single linguistic fracture had just cracked the veneer of Zirithian legal supremacy. The weight of ancient agreements, now suspect, and it was only beginning. The overseer stood, his robes dragging trails of symbolic authority. "This is not scholarship," he hissed. "This is weaponized semantics. A crude attempt to escape responsibility." Caden tilted his head, voice steady. "Weaponized semantics is your invention. We just studied it." The air thickened. Lurok's mouth curled. "You come here cloaked in mourning, wielding footnotes like blades?" Caden looked directly at him. "Words are weapons. You taught us that." The chamber inhaled as one. The phrase echoed, not just in sound but in subtext, invoking every moment of Zirithian dominance, every time an empire bled a rival through clever treaties rather than war. "Is it treachery," Caden asked, "to use the tools we were given?" No reply came. Not yet, because in that moment, the weapon wasn't a bomb or a fleet. It was the realization that the student had mastered the master's art and turned it inward. Ripple by ripple, the court began to fracture. One delegate whispered to another. A pair of archivists from the Vothari Dominion unspooled ancient treaties, scanning for the same corruption. The Creel ambassador, stoic and silent, abruptly turned off his translation node. In silence, there was judgment, and it was not falling on earth. Chur clutched his scroll too tightly, mandibles twitching. He'd read those clauses 100 times, but never seen them. Now they burned. He glanced at Caden, who stood beneath the dais like a condemned man whose executioner had dropped the blade on his own foot. And still, the Terran did not gloat. That unnerved them most of all. Away from the tribunal, in the veiled antechambers carved of obsidian alloy, Lurok stood alone with him. "I warned Earth," he said softly, "not to send children to do men's work." Caden didn't flinch. "Then you should have prepared for what children become when left alone too long." Lurok's eyes narrowed. "This path leads to ruin. For you. For Earth." Caden stepped forward, gaze unblinking. "You once told a Terran envoy that only fools mistake silence for ignorance." The overseer's breath hissed. "I learned from masters," Caden continued, voice low and razor-edged. "Shame you don't practice anymore. No threats, no shouting, just the quiet certainty of a man who had seen the script and rewritten it while his enemy was still performing. They saw diplomacy as theater. He brought a script they couldn't read. The whispers started slowly, almost imperceptibly, like static at the edge of a signal. Caden seeded them with care. A misinterpreted idiom during a corridor conversation. A smile paired with a deliberately loose translation. A proverb left untranslated just long enough for uncertainty to bloom. "The winds speak differently here," he told a serene envoy over tea, translating a Zirithian idiom as an omen of rebellion instead of grace. By the time the envoy passed it on to her court, the meaning had twisted. The Zirithians ruled through nuance, but that blade cut both ways. He slipped double meanings into diplomatic briefings, cited obscure clauses with purposeful ambiguity, reintroduced forgotten words that danced on the edge of insult. He never raised his voice, never accused. He simply let the others ask, "Why didn't we notice this before?" And then, "What else have they hidden?" The Concord's lesser races began to mutter in private, checking their records, calling in scholars, hiring Terran interpreters. Each conversation ended with narrowed eyes and furrowed brows. The threads of control began to fray, not through war, through doubt. Protocol echo, 9 was proposed as a minor trade adjustment, an economic efficiency clause intended to streamline cargo inspections across shared territories. Caden presented it as a concession, a Terran effort to promote unity. The language was pristine, courteous, boring even, but buried in subsection 12, beneath logistical terms and transport tax exemptions, lay a phrase last seen in Xerithian documents 300 cycles ago: servant right of path under banner pledge. Ancient legalese, once used in their feudal era to designate territory under personal stewardship of noble houses. In modern context, it meant nothing, unless invoked, and one sign it would be. The clause carried dormant obligations, fealty rights, protection duties, ceremonial bonds of loyalty that had fallen out of use, but not out of law. Caden didn't need them to notice now. He just needed them to agree. Lurok approved the proposal by proxy, brushing it off as another Terran overcorrection. It passed through the procedural review unnoticed, until the Valari flagged it for translation assistance. Their scholars found the old clause. Their leaders found implications. Their rivals found opportunity. When the report returned to Lurok's desk, his hands shook for the first time in a decade. Caden had just turned a minor trade document into a legal time bomb, with the Xerithians as its unwitting detonator. Lurok summoned the court the next day with pomp and steel in his voice. But the chamber echoed strangely. 6 seats remained vacant. Then 8. Then 11. Some envoys cited illness. Others invoked procedural delays. One simply sent an aide with a message: Earth's absence compromises our confidence in proceedings. No outrage. No rebellion. Just absence. The emptiness spoke louder than dissent. It meant something had shifted. That presence no longer equaled control. Lurok's monologue continued, but it was swallowed by the silence. And in that quiet, Caden's ghost walked. He didn't need to speak. His words had already been weaponized and set loose. The backlash was swift. In a public address, Lurok declared Earth's status under procedural review. Their observer rights were suspended. Caden was barred from future interchambers, pending re-evaluation of diplomatic standing. It was phrased as law. It felt like punishment, but in private, ambassadors balked. The Creel envoy refused to meet with Xerithian staff. The Vothari cited fairness statutes and halted proceedings until a Terran representative returned. Even the serene, long-considered loyal vassals postponed their summit, not out of protest, but uncertainty. They all knew, if Earth could be silenced for asking questions, who would be next? Behind the doors Caden could no longer enter. He was present in every word. His absence weighed heavier than his speech. The court began to flinch from its own shadow. When the Valari rose to speak, few expected anything of consequence. Their envoy trembled under his robes, antennae twitching with nervous reverence. But his voice, amplified and clear, shattered that assumption. We submit a challenge to Article 19, Treaty of Tributary Exchange, signed 113 cycles past. Lurok's gaze locked on him like a vice. The Hall of Accords loomed like a god's tomb. Hesperian Prime, a station older than most species civilizations, glittered with crystalline spires and gravitic tapestries, each designed to belittle those who entered. The floor hummed beneath Caden Mar's boots, alive with memory, with judgment. He walked alone. The Xerithian court had made sure of that. No aides, no allies, only silence and scorn. Caden, interim ambassador, untested, unarmed, stepped forward into the pit. They had summoned him not to parley, but to bleed dignity in ritual. Eyes followed, slit-pupiled, faceted, luminous. They didn't glare or sneer. They assessed. Predators at a feast. He kept his posture neutral, pace steady. Inside, though, his heart drummed a furious rhythm. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was a scholar, a man of syntax and semantics. But the bombing had left the senior delegation in cinders. And so he came. The hall swallowed him, vast and ornate. Every column, every sigil, every suspended rune whispered, "You do not belong." Caden stood at the foot of the dais, eyes raised not in defiance, but comprehension. Xerithians dueled with semantics. A flicked wrist could mean forgiveness or insult. An intoned syllable, a declaration of war. The overseer hadn't yet spoken, but the court was already bristling with intent. Courtiers flickered scent markers through specialized gills. Others swayed in time with invisible cultural rhythms. Power here wasn't shouted. It dripped. Caden watched. He read between the silences, cataloged gesture and cadence. He would not attack, but he could understand. Backstage, moments before entry, Meryl had cornered him in a shadowed vestibule. Her voice was a rasp of tension. This place is a trap. Every move you make, they'll turn into a noose. Her arm, wrapped in old war bandage tech, flexed as if it could punch reality. You shouldn't be here, Mar. He offered her the softest reply. But I am. She stared, then vanished into the shadows like a bodyguard who'd already imagined 3 dozen assassination scenarios. Overseer Lurok Vel descended in silence. Not walked, descended. A glide, a performed gravity. Tall even for his kind, Vel wore ceremonial thorns interlaced through his robes, symbols of legal authority and poetic cruelty. Terran emissary, he purred, voice of velvet scalpel. We grieve with you, and in grief we welcome. The court rippled with what might have been laughter or contempt. Vel continued, every sentence a polished dagger. Trade routes suffer. Ships are lost. Misunderstandings bloom. Still, Earth sends you. A symbol, no doubt. Caden said nothing. Not yet. He simply bowed with impossible correctness, mimicking the Xerithian protocol to the breath, and watched Vel's second eyelid twitch. They began the ritual of subtle dishonor, a performative decree read by a tri-throated cantor, layered in harmonic mockery. Each phrase laundered Earth's tragedies into ornamental grief. Each pause a nail. The decrees were ancient, precise. Each line curated to reduce status, to encode subjugation. But then, Caden frowned, and they who come without storm, they who arrive without tide, they who presume, shall see what silence earns. I repeat, they who presume. In Xerithian ceremonial speech, redundancy is a blemish, akin to farting during a funeral. It implies instability or deception. Caden tilted his head, almost imperceptibly. To most, it was meaningless. To him, a crack in the wall. He began recalculating. Not the meanings, the intent behind them. Why the error? Was it scripted? Slipped in? He filed it away. Not as a flaw, but a confession. As the final syllable echoed into solemn quiet, Caden's lips curved. It wasn't wide, wasn't smug, but it was wrong enough to draw the eyes of the observant. Sure saw it, the underclerk barely out of molt. He wasn't supposed to notice anything, but he did, and he froze. Because no one smiles during the decree of mourning. Not unless they're suicidal, or they've just seen something no one else understands. Caden didn't move, didn't blink. The hall waited. He waited longer. He wasn't trained to kill, just to understand. That was enough. The tribunal chamber curved like a ribcage around him, organic and oppressive. Caden was placed on the lowest tier, seated below the elevated thrones of the Concord delegates. Every meter of verticality was curated dominance, his placement a message louder than any words. He folded his hands calm, spine straight. His chair was smaller, made of unfinished synthwood, while theirs glistened like crystallized bone. Lurok's seat rose highest, a blade-shaped platform crowned with banners stitched in legal precedent and bloodied conquest. Above, 1,000 gossamer recorders hovered silently, broadcasting to every capital that mattered. He was to be spectacle, nothing more. But Caden's gaze drifted upward, not in defiance, but in study. Each alien ambassador bore ceremonial sigils, linguistic tattoos that shifted with emotion. He was already translating them. They thought they had him surrounded, but he was already rewriting the language of the trap. Lurok Vel spoke first, always first. His voice filled the hall with sonorous disdain, every syllable a blade. The Concord mourns Earth's losses, yet mourning does not absolve guilt. A spectral projection shimmered above him, charred holes of the Terran convoy, torn open in silent void. Treaty 17 Theta promised mutual navigation protections. Your freighters trespassed beyond the demilitarized coordinates. The Concorde was forced to respond. A hush fell like a curtain. Lurok gestured, and a scroll unfolded in midair, Zirathian script, alive with syntax vines and binding grammar glyphs. Your presence here is not diplomacy. It is contrition. Earth has broken faith. Caden's voice was soft, but it cut through the hush like a tuning fork. I request the original text of 17 Theta, both signatory versions. The request landed like a misfired weapon. Lurok's head tilted. To what end? To understand the obligations, not merely the memory of them. Even the translators hesitated before conveying that answer. Caden's face betrayed nothing, but inside, every faculty hummed alive. The hall dimmed as the treaty texts unfolded, side by side, suspended in hollow thread. The Zirathian version coiled in calligraphic menace. The standard Terran, a precise, formal rendering devoid of poetics. Caden stood. He moved to the projection and raised a hand. Not to touch, to point. In line 12, clause 3, the phrase mutual assurance of corridor integrity is rendered as he paused, narrowing his eyes. Ares Koth Valreth. A murmur. The Zirathians stirred. Caden continued, gentle as falling ash. In your tongue, that formulation implies a unilateral guarantee, not mutual. The burden rests solely on the second signatory, Earth. A second pause. A longer silence. He highlighted both clauses, side by side. In standard Terran, the phrasing remains reciprocal. Each party shall ensure safety of passage for the other. No ambiguity. Chur, from his clerk's station, leaned forward slightly. Caden turned back to the chamber. This is not a translation error. It's a syntactic misalignment. One that alters legal intent. Lurok's fingers twitched on his armrest. Caden gave a slight bow. Therefore, I request a formal syntax audit. If our interpretation of obligations differs at the linguistic core, it demands reconciliation before judgment. Not an accusation, a scholarly request. The kind no diplomat could reject without revealing the fear beneath ceremony. The Valari envoy continued. The treaty's primary clause, Taureth Vindaka, was translated for our court as protection covenant. But new readings suggest the original syntax implies enforced subjugation. He placed a document on the review platform. Zirathian terms of protection contain embedded servitude hieroglyphs. We were never told. Gasps followed, and then silence. Because every minor race in the chamber had treaties. Every treaty had clauses. And now, none were trusted. Others followed. The Drosari, the Mendicants, even the semi-autonomous Luxari initiates requested formal reviews. The court, once a cathedral of order, now echoed with the clatter of collapsing assumptions. Each phrase Caden had dropped was now an avalanche. Merrill watched everything unravel from the shadows. The guards had shifted, rotations changed subtly, corridors rerouted. Routine became ritual. 2 Terran aides had gone missing. She intercepted a signal masked as trade telemetry. Embedded in it, a Zirathian threat wrapped in legal metaphor. A promise dressed as poetry. She confronted Caden in his quarters. They're preparing for something, she said, eyes hard. Something final, and you're not invited. He said nothing at first, because part of him already knew. The predators weren't posturing anymore. They were hunting. She found him standing before the viewport, eyes lost in the slipstream trails. You need to stop, Merrill said. He didn't turn. Too late. Her voice cracked like a whip. This isn't a game. This isn't war. It's ritual. They don't just kill you. They erase you. Make it so you were never in the room. He finally faced her. Dark circles carved under his eyes. Fingers trembling. I've seen what happens when people trust words too much. Empires collapse. Civilizations vanish. Because no one thought to question the root of a sentence. She stepped closer, softer now. And if you're wrong, his silence was answer enough. But she saw it, behind the fatigue and fear, a mind alight with purpose. She didn't understand the game, but she knew a man who believed he could finish it, even if it killed him. Caden no longer slept. In the hours when silence thickened, he saw echoes of fallen empires. The Oltherai Confederacy, who worshipped syntax as law, obliterated by a mistranslated treaty. The Red Scribes of Mocker, undone by a conjunction error that gave away their throne world. He read through ancient records with bleary eyes and trembling hands, tracing the bloodlines of collapse through punctuation and emphasis. A phrase kept returning, one he'd never heard spoken aloud, but had seen carved into ruins and battle memorials. Meaning is a throne. Was that what he was building? Or was he simply another scribe atop a crumbling empire? A question bloomed in his mind like a wound. What if this is how they all died? Not with fleets, but with footnotes? The thought haunted him, but he kept reading. The tribunal reconvened. Tension bristled like a storm barely held in stasis. Caden entered uninvited. He moved to the center of the chamber, head bowed, robes impeccable. The silence parted around him like reverence or dread. The ambassadors murmured. Lurok rose with glacial fury. You were barred. Caden did not respond immediately. He raised his head, met every eye, and then he spoke. Zaktor, Vea, and Nalhurin. It was not Terran, not even Concord standard. It was Zirathian high ritual tongue. Old, sacred, restricted. The court froze. The phrase meant, he who speaks truth in blooded silence may claim the eye. It was only permitted to nobility born under ancestral oath. To speak it in the hall was equivalent to claiming ancient judicial privilege, trial by legacy. Lurok did not shout. He simply stepped forward, voice colder than vacuum. You defile what you do not understand. Caden answered evenly. I understand enough to know what the eye means. Lurok's expression cracked. Not with rage, with recognition. Caden had just invoked a legal right so old, so rarely used, that no one living had dared utter it. It demanded response, and it could not be refused. The trial had shifted, not a court anymore, a reckoning. In courts of blood, truth is the sharpest tongue. The hall of accords shimmered with ceremonial gravity, every spire and suspended glyph burning brighter than regulation allowed. Delegates had arrived in full regalia, not to debate, not to speak, but to witness. There was no room for deniability now. The trial of legacy was sanctioned. No one could look away. The floor vibrated beneath the weight of attending authority. The farthest banners of the Concord hung at half-mast, not in mourning, but in apprehension. Translation arrays spun at triple capacity. The court's AI orb glowed crimson gold, ready to log every syllable, every breath. Caden entered alone. No herald, no entourage. A single Terran flag flickered quietly on his shoulder lapel. His face bore no expression. Not steel, not serenity, just clarity. Lurok stood across from him in full ancestral armor, etched with the myths of his bloodline, barbed with ceremonial thorns. His presence had always swallowed the chamber. But now, the silence between them swallowed him. This was no longer ritual. This was reckoning. The trial of legacy began not with a gavel, but a breath, a synchronization of voice and will that reached backward through centuries. Lurok spoke first. He wove lineage into threat, recited epics that stretched beyond most species' understanding. His voice dripped with venom, but it wore the cloak of honor. He invoked the memory of the Pax Zirathian, the great silencing of the Vorganian descent, the linguistic absolution of the Akar betrayal. Each reference an edifice, each name a monument. He did not shout. He performed. But Caden did not flinch. When his turn came, he responded not with challenge, but with calibration. Every word was precise, every citation surgical. He responded to Lurok's invocations with context the others had forgotten. He redefined terms as he spoke them, rotating old truths to reveal the mold underneath. This myth of unity, he said, began not in peace, but in erasure. He cited Edict 114c, the original Zirathian language purge, known to most as a diplomatic reform. He described how the term Kelshera once meant honor, but was later edited to mean submission. The court's breath wavered. Lurok countered, hurling verses in triadic meter. Caden shifted dialects mid-reply, lacing his words with tonal emphasis, correcting the ancient form before the overseer could complete his attack. The duel was no longer verbal. It was architectural, and Caden was reshaping the foundation beneath them all. The legends of the Zeratheans were scaffolds of power, fluent in grandeur, airtight in reverence. But Caden had found the seams. He spoke of the Dawn Compact, their sacred tale of self-sacrifice, where 9 houses bled to protect the weak. But he added a single tonal inflection to the word bled, altering it to a form rarely used, one that implied not voluntary sacrifice, but coerced restitution. The meaning twisted. The myth cracked. He quoted the Ode of Velamon, the poem that declared the Zeratheans eternal stewards of order. But he recited the preamble most had forgotten, which framed their authority not as inheritance, but temporary stewardship. Delegates shifted in their seats. And then, more softly, what we believe shapes who we become. But what we misunderstand shapes what we destroy. The court murmured. Every line he delivered was truth, but delivered in a tone that betrayed unease. Emphasis that asked questions where once there was only certainty. The stories they had used to govern were unraveling, one syllable at a time. Caden's voice lowered. He invoked a lament, a Zerathian mourning verse, long buried in the forbidden registers. Soft, rhythmic, almost beautiful. But inside its structure, nested like a seed, was a phrase, Sailcar Byn Tesh. It translated, on the surface, as they who rest beneath. Poetic, harmless. But among linguistic scholars, it carried another weight. It was once the code used to classify the Atron massacre, a purged atrocity buried in sand, denied by every overseer for 300 years. A race erased, a planet sterilized. There was no record of it in public archives. But the words knew. Lurok's breath hitched. He knew. The court leaned forward, and in that breath of stillness, knowledge bloomed. Caden had not accused them. He had simply reminded them of what they chose to forget. Lurok surged forward, desperation sharpening his posture. He spoke rapidly, slurring consonants, trying to reassert control. His phrasing frayed. The measured cadence of ritual broke into fragments. Caden remained motionless. And then, it happened. Lurok ended his rebuttal with a verb in Valteran case, a tense reserved only for ritual surrender. A grammatical form last spoken during the Treaty of Sarek's Fall, used when a blooded noble abdicated before defeat. No one dare breathe. The court AI chirped softly. Error code 7 final. Legacy contradiction detected. The transcript lit up across every channel. Lurok had spoken the tense of surrender. In a trial of legacy, that was not a misstep. It was a crime. The red glyphs pulsed. Not a siren, not a klaxon, just a quiet shimmer. Protocols older than rebellion activating on their own. The overseer froze. The court's AI declared, per trial statute 17, usage of abdication tense during legacy contest constitutes high betrayal. Status, treason. Status, irrevocable. He tried to protest, but the system no longer listened. It wasn't vengeance. It was law. The attendant stepped forward, not with violence, but precision. They stripped the ceremonial thorns from his shoulders, peeled away the glyph-etched mantle of his rank. His nameplate darkened, recorded history blinking out of registry. No voices raised, because the law spoke louder. He stood bare in the center of the hall, no longer overseer, no longer anything. Delegates turned away, one by one, not in scorn, in exile. To witness the dishonored was to lend them legacy. So they offered only silence. Caden did not move. He watched as Lurok was led away by cold efficiency. No trial, no appeal, only the immutable machinery of the words the Zerathians themselves had codified. Lurok did not struggle, but his eyes, once sharp with mastery, now flickered with something else. Recognition. He had thought the Terran diplomat was a lamb. He now understood he had hosted a blade. The final echo of his footsteps faded, and with it the old court. The chamber was quiet, not stunned, reverent. Caden bowed, not low, not subservient, just enough. A gesture precise in its calibration. Not to Lurok, not even to the court. To the moment. Earth accepts the apology, he said. No one answered, but the words were recorded, archived, echoed. His statement would become a precedent. He straightened, turned, and walked without hesitation. No guards followed. No one stopped him, because no one could. He had not conquered. He had simply understood the terrain better than they did. Outside the hall, camera drones were to life. The transcript had already gone public. The trial of legacy, once a symbolic ritual for internal disputes, was now galactic spectacle. Every broadcast replayed the same moment. The slip of Lurok's tongue. The phrase. The error. The law reacting like a living thing. No war had started. No blood had been shed. But the Zirathian hold was broken. On Valari screens, students studied the trial as a lesson in autonomy. On Creel ships, officers began renegotiating terms once thought permanent. In the Serene academies, young diplomats rewrote their histories with cautious curiosity. Caden's name spread, not in fear, in fascination. He had not threatened, had not raised a fleet, had not drawn a weapon. He had listened. He had read. And then, when the trap closed, he simply stepped aside and let the weight of their own words do the rest. He didn't raise his voice. Just let the weight of their own words bury them. The banners changed overnight. The Terran emblem, once politely tolerated, often ignored, now hung at full height among the Accord's oldest sigils. No longer a token of participation. Now a mark of precedent. The court's official index appended a new title beneath Earth's registry, Linguistic Integrity Ally. It was not ceremonial. It was functional. In the aftermath of the trial of legacy, silence lingered longer between each diplomatic exchange. Words were weighed differently. The cadence of power slowed, shifted. Every statement bore a faint echo of the trial, like a bruise beneath silk. And still, no one spoke of Lurokvel. His name had vanished from official records, his past decisions recategorized as unattributed rulings. The Zirathians filed no objection. They withdrew their delegation with neither fanfare nor excuse. Their seats remained, but unclaimed. And yet, the hall stood, whole, changed. In a place once ruled by inflection, reverence now lived in restraint. The Zirathian shuttle departed without a send-off. No rituals. No final speech, just empty chairs and a quiet corridor where subordinates avoided each other's gaze. Even the station's ambient lighting seemed dimmer as the last of them left. They had not been defeated in war. Their fleets were still vast, their technology still superior. But perception, the true engine of their control, had fractured. No one could look at them now without wondering what other truths they'd buried beneath beautiful words. What power remained was power unspoken, and that, more than anything, terrified them. Caden sat alone, surrounded by stacked treaties and archaic dialect tables. The room felt heavier now, not with pressure, with consequence. He read old accords line by line, translating and retranslating, searching not for loopholes, but for ghosts. He didn't feel victorious, just awake. He hadn't torn anything down. He just shifted the gravity of the room. A word too sharp, a truth too timely. He rubbed his eyes and reread a clause from Treaty 12 Beta. Let no silence speak injustice. Not poetic, just legalese. But now it felt different. Alive. Meryl found him where she expected, buried in scrolls, fingers smudged with annotation ink. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed. They'll come for you eventually, she said. But not with knives. With etiquette. He didn't look up. You didn't beat them, she continued. You just made them play fair. That's worse for them. He exhaled slowly. Then I suppose I should stay ready. She stepped closer, her voice softening. They can't erase you now. Too many heard you. Too many understood. He glanced at her, something unspoken passing between them. Respect, maybe. Or fatigue with a shared edge. You were right, he said. It wasn't a war. She shrugged. Wars are simpler. Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of weapon oil and old paper behind her. Across the Concord, something stirred. The Valari established a syntax tribunal, part judiciary, part translation council. The mendicant worlds ratified a lexicon pact, requiring all future treaties to undergo multilingual audits. The Creel returned to their ancient practice of truth councils, now reinforced with Terran syntax theory. Earth had not become a superpower. It had become a reference point, and language, once a weapon of domination, was now a medium of parity. Diplomats argued with footnotes. Ambassadors double-checked tenses. Clarity became a strategy. Treaties became harder to write, but easier to trust. Even the serene, proud beyond gravity, requested a Terran linguist for their negotiations. Not to dominate, to understand. In a quiet plaza on Earth, a monument was raised. Not a Caden, of a Terran diplomat in neutral robes, holding a scroll open to the wind. There was no name engraved. Only words, understand first, then speak. Visitors left notes beneath it. Not praise, but questions. Questions were sacred now. The statue never changed expression, but from certain angles, it looked like it was listening. The Hall of Accords brimmed again. A young Terran ambassador stood at the center dais. Their posture was measured, their voice precise. No dramatic flourishes, just deliberate cadence. Every word chosen, every pause earned. Veteran envoys leaned forward, listening more carefully than usual. At the back, in the shadows of the observer's gallery, Caden watched. He said nothing, just smiled, not because he saw victory, but because he saw continuity. Another voice, another page. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was respectful. And then the court listened. We weren't made to rule, just understand. And sometimes that's enough. The classroom was small, stone-walled and quiet, tucked beneath a wind-scoured plateau on the neutral world of Koresh. No banners, no holograms, no empire. Just slate and scrolls and breath. A Zirathian child sat cross-legged on the polished floor, her brow marked with blue learner's ink. The tattoos shimmered faintly with meaning not yet earned. She did not speak much, as was custom, but her eyes drank everything. The Terran across from her offered no rank, no title, just words. Today's lesson came on parchment older than the child's bloodline. Faded script, fragile binding. The child held the scroll with reverence and traced her fingers over the first phrase, uncertain. She sounded it out slowly, her voice like rain on old metal. Silence is power. Her teacher did not correct her. He simply listened and nodded. The words hung in the air, too large for the room. The Terran's gaze flickered, not in judgment, but memory. That phrase, once unleashed as propaganda, had sparked the burning Accord crisis, igniting 5 border systems in diplomatic fire. The Zirathian interpretation had been layered with threat. The Terran reply, misaligned. The war that followed lasted 4 cycles. Millions gone, and the phrase buried. Until now. The child looked up, eyes wide. What does it mean? The Terran offered a quiet smile. That depends on who speaks it and why. She frowned slightly, as if searching for meaning deeper than translation. He watched her pause, not with hesitation, but with thought. There was again what the court had once feared. Not defiance, comprehension. He leaned forward. You don't need to fear the words. Just understand them before you wield them. She nodded slowly. The scroll remained open between them, but the lesson had already moved past it. Across the stars, the ripples continued. New treaties included vocal logs as legal record. AI transcriptions now flagged shifts in tone, not just meaning. Diplomacy academies doubled their hours of cultural linguistics. And in places once ruled by dominance, understanding now held currency. It was slower, messier, but it endured. The trial of legacy had not changed everything, but had changed enough. In some systems, words were still sharpened, but now few were fired blindly. And when silence fell, it carried meaning, not fear. The child looked back to her scroll. She repeated the phrase, slower, measured. Silence is power. Her voice didn't tremble. She looked up again. Can I say it? The teacher nodded once. Someday. She smiled, not wide but with weight. Her fingers lingered on the scroll as she recited the words again, softer this time, as if the meaning had changed in her mouth. One day, someone else will speak. She paused, and the court will listen. The diplomat brought no army, just truth and patience.